And a very good evening to you. I'm Patrick Falk in Hong Kong. You're watching ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. LegCo Finance Committee meeting gets off to a shaky start with several lawmakers protesting court ruling for unseated oath-taking lawmakers. Private meeting between US President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin gives rise to conspiracy claims between the two nations. And Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull demands answers for the fatal shooting of an Australian woman by a Minneapolis police officer. OK, we begin with local news, and it was far from plain sailing at today's final Finance Committee meeting before LegCo breaks for the summer, with Pan Democrats voicing their anger over the High Court's decision to unseat 4 lawmakers for improper oath-taking.
工作人員請你請阿鐘超雄出去好嘛？
Drama broke out in the chamber as Labour Party's Fernando Cheung was escorted out by guards, having stood in protest with placards of the 4 ousted lawmakers and for refusing to sit down. It caused the meeting to be suspended twice. Other Pan Democrats, including Claudia Mo and Eddie Ju, also argued that business shouldn't go on as usual because 4 democratically elected legislators have been expelled. 8 items were awaiting the committee's approval, including a $3.6 billion funding request for education. The government has made it clear it needs the funding request approved as quickly as possible so that schools can receive their new resources in time for the coming school year. Meantime, Chief Secretary Matthew Jones once again urged Pan Democrats to consider public interest and debate funding requests in a rational manner.
I appeal. The Chief Executive yesterday appealed already. I repeat the appeal today to all Pan Democrat political members to deal with the 8 items on the Finance Committee agenda today, next 8 hours, rationally and in a sensible way, because they are all in public interest. All the 8 items, in fact, are urgent, important to the community, and also livelihood issues. So I would urge...
News elsewhere next, and in what's bound to stoke conspiracy claims between US President Donald Trump and Russian leader Vladimir Putin even further. The White House has now confirmed the 2 presidents held a second private meeting during the recent G20 summit. Ryan Brooks has the details.
Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin had a second, previously unknown private meeting at the G20 earlier this month, and there's no official record of what the two discussed. White House officials confirming Tuesday the U.S. president and his Russian counterpart had a conversation at a dinner for world leaders. Officials didn't elaborate on how long it was or what was discussed, but a second source said Trump reportedly got up from his seat halfway through dinner and spent about an hour talking with the Russian leader. The discussion said to have taken place without a U.S. translator, raising eyebrows among other leaders in what's been called a breach of national security protocol. Trump is under intense scrutiny over Russian interference in the U.S. election, so all eyes were on the presidents when they held formal talks on July 7th at the summit, in which Trump said Putin denied allegations that he directed efforts to sway the presidential outcome.
Well, meantime, Trump had a clear message for opponents of his health care bill, which collapsed in the U.S. Senate yesterday, dealing a huge setback to his bid to repeal former President Barack Obama's signature health care bill.
I've been saying that, Mike, I think you'll agree, for a long time. Let Obamacare fail. It'll be a lot easier. And I think we're probably in that position where we'll just let Obamacare fail. We're not going to own it. I'm not going to own it. I can tell you the Republicans are not going to own it. We'll let Obamacare fail, and then the Democrats are going to come to us and they're going to say, how do we fix it? How do we fix it? Or how do we come up with a new plan?
Now, Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull called the fatal shooting of an Australian woman by a Minneapolis police officer over the weekend shocking and inexplicable. The country's diplomats are seeking answers from US authorities. A dawn vigil was held on a Sydney beach where the victim, Justine Demond, called home. Justine was killed in Minneapolis on Saturday night after she made a 911 call to report a possible assault in her quiet neighborhood. The fatal shot fired through an open window of a patrol car. The Australian Prime Minister is now demanding answers.
This is a shocking killing. It's inexplicable. Our hearts go out to her family. I mean, how can a woman out in the street in her pyjamas seeking assistance from the police be shot like that? It is a shocking killing, and yes, but we are demanding answers on behalf of her family, and our hearts go out to her family and all of her friends and loved ones. It's a truly tragic killing there in Minneapolis.
The US has established new economic sanctions against Iran despite the country's adherence to its international nuclear deal. Washington says that Iran has engaged in what it calls malign activities in the Middle East, which undercut any positive contributions emanating from the nuclear accord signed in 2015. Tehran agreed to curb its nuclear program with 6 world powers, including the US, in exchange for lifting oil and financial sanctions. The US State Department said Iran was undermining regional stability, security and prosperity in the region, acting against the spirit of the nuclear deal. Now, a senior US Army official says North Korea doesn't have the ability to strike the states with any degree of accuracy, despite Pyongyang's firing of intercontinental ballistic missiles earlier this month.
I do agree in principle with the assessment that the North Koreans are moving quickly to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile capability. I, however, am not sanguine that the test on the 4th of July demonstrates that they have the capacity to strike the United States with any degree of accuracy or reasonable confidence of success.
Meantime, public executions on riverbanks, school grounds and marketplaces. That's the fate of some North Koreans who commit crimes, including prostitution and public theft, according to a new report. Grace Lee has the story.
Shocking new evidence of public executions for petty theft in North Korea. A new report showing locations like school grounds, marketplaces, and riverbanks were all often used for grisly public displays. The charges anything from prostitution or stealing rice and corn from farms to distributing media from South Korea, ending in a public shooting or, according to one North Korean defector, with being beaten to death because, quote, some crimes were considered not worth wasting bullets on.
The more poignant and powerful reason for them is that they are a powerful tool of control by the creation of fear. And I think the fact that, the victims' families, co-workers, and even children from local schools are sometimes summoned to watch these events in public spaces is indicative of the fact that this is a means of deterrence, a means of inciting fear, and establishing at least outward, unwavering loyalty to the regime and essentially its leaders.
The South Korean NGO behind the report says it aims to document the locations of public killings and mass burials to support an international push to hold North Korea accountable for what it calls crimes against humanity. Pyongyang rejects charges of rights abuses, saying its citizens enjoy protection under the Constitution, and instead accuses the United States of being the world's worst human rights violator.
Okay, up next, the latest from the world of business.
Yes, thanks a lot, Patrick. Let's kick off by taking a look at what happened on the markets today here in Hong Kong. The Hang Seng Index of leading shares seeing its 8th straight day of gains, finishing up 0.56% at 26,672 points, near a 2-year high. We are currently up on the index by more than 21% so far this year. One of the largest fallers, though, was Li Ka-shing's Hutchison Telecoms. The company's price fell almost 3% after receiving bids for its fixed-line unit yesterday. Well, meanwhile, shares in Henan Province's largest city commercial bank made a solid debut today, despite weak demand from retail investors for the billion-dollar offering. Zhongyuan Bank traded as high as $2.55 per share compared to the $2.45 listing price. It ended the day at $2.49. The timing of its IPO appears to have helped it get off to a good start. Now, the future of trade between the world's top 2 economies is being put under the microscope as business leaders from China and the US kick off discussions today in Washington. The hope is that China and the US can come to a greater economic understanding despite rising political tensions. Dan Epstein has more from Beijing.
It's called the Comprehensive Economic Dialogue. Select business leaders have been invited to discuss the future of China-US trade. The 100-day negotiations launched by President Xi and Trump in April saw China approve imports of American beef and liquefied natural gas. and the American market open to Chinese poultry. But with the trade deficit at around $350 billion, American businessmen in particular will be hoping that more can be agreed to get trade back on track.
I think we view the 100-day negotiations and the early harvest outcomes in particular as important momentum builders. The question becomes one of how will that momentum be transitioned into dealing with the other more systemic issues that are undermining the U.S.-China commercial relationship.
Issues like how China and the U.S. define fair trade.
I think China is perhaps less concerned about the trade deficit per se, but the quality of the trade relationship.
China wants to be deemed a market economy, but U.S. companies claim unfair treatment in China's market. Technology products in particular are often blocked from entering, citing threats to national security.
We're seeing national security used for protectionist purposes, which is excluding foreign ICT, information communications technologies manufacturers, from accessing the market as fully as they should.
America is reportedly considering regulations of its own on imports of cheap Chinese steel, which Chinese factories produced at record levels this month. Dan Epstein, ViuTV News, Beijing.
The Bank of England has added a literary touch to its new £10 note, which will be in circulation from September. The new tenner features none other than 19th century British novelist Jane Austen, best known for works including Pride and Prejudice and Emma. Tuesday marks the 200th anniversary of her death. She actually received a £10 advance on her first novel, the equivalent today to about $1,300 US. But that's not the only thing that makes it special. This is the first plastic £10 note, and it comes after the BOE rolled out its £5 note made of polymer film last year, which it says is more durable and harder to forge.
It's just so fantastic